all. We are continuing our journey through Hebrews chapter 11, and today we are going to be in verses 23 through 29. So if you want to turn there now, that's pretty much where we're going to be spending our time for this morning. And okay, we are continuing our faith journey through Hebrews 11. Does anybody remember what faith means?
Believe in action.
Okay, very good. Very simplistically put, yes, it's belief or trust in something, and it's actually the act of doing something because of that. Okay? It's you have information, you believe it, and I'm like, I trust it more than other things around, and so that's why I'm choosing to do these things. That's why we kind of started this idea on this faith journey through Hebrews 11, is because it needs to be foundational for us to realize that, hey, look, it kind of points back to the Old Testament. We'll talk more about that, and kind of leads us through how we became faithful in the first place. It's actually because of people's sacrifices that they made and their hearts were turned towards the Lord that we have the Bible today. And that we have these amazing stories to inspire us to stay close to our God. Because there is a land that is awaiting us, the promised land. Bob Goff, author of several books, but he started this thing, instead of Bible study groups, he stopped doing Bible study groups altogether. And I'm like, well, you can't do that. And he's like, well, I stopped Bible study groups because we started Bible doing groups. So we take a verse and we go out and we do whatever the verse was actually telling us to go do. And I thought that was actually pretty profound. Something that I think I need to implement even in my life more, and just realize that the Bible's just not there just to know, but it's to know and to move us in a direction towards Christ, towards love of Him and service of other people as well. Okay, so a bit of review. I wish we had our pictures here. It would help us, but we'll try to bear without them. We've gone through some of the people who were faithful since the beginning, thinking of Abel and Enoch, and probably greatest of all of that is being Abraham. It's because of all of them, like we said, that we have our faith today, and it was through God's promise of Abraham that came true that the people of Israel were actually starting to multiply, and that's kind of where we're taking up our talk today. It's Hebrews just runs right through it. Where the Old Testament breaks between Genesis and Exodus, it doesn't. It just keeps on going, and this is our faith journey. Today we're going to be talking about the life overview of Moses, and realizing that between the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus, there's a 400-year gap where we hear nothing. Okay? And so then we come upon this strange scene where Moses is born and these Israelites are oppressed by Egyptians, and how can that be? How can Israelites be oppressed by Egyptians when Joseph was really quite a high rank, and actually really favored by Pharaoh? Just a little bit of a backstory. Just a little bit of history. Can we do that? Is that okay?
Yes.
I got one yes. I'll take that as a yes for everybody.
But make it short.
I will make it short, Paul. I will make it short. Thank you for that. Okay, so when Joseph came to Egypt, there was these people called the Hyksos, okay, people. And they weren't actually Egyptians at all. They were actually from that was actually who the Pharaoh was. They were an Asian type of people, but they weren't actually Egyptians, okay? So they were actually people that have adopted things from many other religions, and they're actually curious about whose God was actually really God. So for instance, they adopted several things from Canaanites and several things from different nations and religious practices. But then there was internal war within Egypt, and the Hyksos people got overthrown, and the native Egyptians became rulers again over Egypt. Okay, all this is happening in between Genesis and Exodus. We have no idea. We just look towards Egyptian history and go, oh, that makes a little bit more sense. Okay, why this is happening. These people were incredibly nationalistic. And if you weren't Egyptian, then you were highly suspect. Okay? If you weren't from that nation, if you weren't a part of them, then you really didn't belong there. And especially anybody that were favored by the Hyksos people. Because those were their enemies. They overthrew them. They destroyed them. And so the Israelites became this kind of link back to this Hyksos people. And they were incredibly suspicious, and that's actually why this oppression begins and why we get this order for the Pharaoh or the king who orders all of the babies to be killed. The male babies, right? Save the female babies, but kill all the male babies. Because these Hebrews, they are becoming too numerous. And that's where we come into our text here. That's where actually Hebrews takes us up, and we're going to read these 7 verses. Now, try to pay attention here because there's a lot packed in here. And 7 verses, just reading it, we can sometimes get distracted, especially when in a public setting. But let's try to stay focused here on these 7 verses here. Beginning in 23, it says, "By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, when he was grown up, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. And by faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who was invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. And by faith the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they had tempted, by faith the people crossed the Red Sea on the dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned." Okay, if we go back up to actually verse 23, we actually see that, look, it's actually not Moses. I think his parents don't get enough credit here. It's pretty amazing. His parents are actually kind of the unsung heroes of this. It says they didn't fear the king's edict, which doesn't mean that they weren't afraid, by the way. This term fear, you ever wonder why, like, fear the Lord and obey his commandments? We talk about this, you know? It means to observe something, to hold it of great value, and to be obedient to it, right? And so when it says they didn't fear the king's edict, it doesn't mean that they weren't afraid for their child's life. I don't know. You have to ask them. But it seems like hiding it would say, yeah, okay, we need to do things to protect it. But they're saying, look, we're not going to obey this oppressive king's order to kill our child. And it says here in Hebrews that it was because the child was beautiful. You ever see maybe I shouldn't do it. You ever see a baby that's like real cute when it's a baby, and then it gets old, you're like, yeah. So, okay, this is not talking about physical beauty, actually, okay? This is actually talking about something of character. This same term is used in Acts, actually, when talking about Moses and how God looked at him in his own heart, okay? So they saw something, even when it was born, about this child that was significant. They said, we need to save it, and they do so in a pretty strange way. They were willing to put their own lives on the line to save the child. And most of you, I'm assuming all of you, would probably do that, okay? But that's not the case with everybody. But the self-sacrifice that Moses shows later on, it's actually started and implemented actually by his parents. I think they're kind of the unsung heroes of this. He's found by Pharaoh's daughter, as we know, in the water, and she takes him out, and she thankfully is met by a companion there and is nursed by his own mother, and just amazing things go on in his life. And he's called by God by a flaming bush after he runs away. So the author of Hebrews here, I'm not sure what sort of organization they had in explaining this, because I'm not sure if they got things out of order or if they're putting it in order and they're just emphasizing different things. But here's what I mean by this. We look in verses 24 through 26, and that's why it says that he didn't leave out of his own circumstances. He didn't leave because he had to. He actually left because he saw something that was far greater, and he wanted more than even prestige in Egypt. What did Moses give up when he left Egypt behind? Go ahead.
The right to be king.
The right to be king, or very high up at least, in the most powerful nation of the world. What else?
Comfort.
Comfort, yeah, for sure.
Stability.
Stability. There's something about food that the Israelites end up whining about, right? He leaves behind actually some pretty amazing things, by the way. And he says he gets up, and this is what the...
He traded a bunch of reverence for a bunch of whiners.
Yeah, that's right. He traded basically people who would almost worship him to people who almost wanted to kill him, right? Yeah, that's a good point. Bunch of whiny people out in the wilderness, which it's not. We think of wilderness and we think of like our beautiful area. No, it's like a desert, and it's gross, and there's tumbleweeds everywhere. Huh? If that, yeah, exactly. It was not a wonderful place. So he leaves this fertile place with water, and everything is provided for him, and he goes out into the unknown. Okay, this is what the application commentary says. It says, Moses chose his biological family over his adopted family at great personal cost. The loss of wealth, relinquishment of status, and intense mistreatment. Did you see in Hebrews where he's like, he actually chose abuse. He chooses abuse. Anybody up for that? No. And yet that's what Moses does. Well, I mean, some of us are glad for punishment. Okay. Because he saw that the reproach or the disgrace, that word means disgrace, of Christ is actually more important than worldly status. That means that the disgrace of Christ, your reproach of Christ, it means to bring him honor, or he saw character values and ultimately a land that is promised to him, that is promised through their descendants, through Abraham, as far more value than anything on this earth. Okay, verse 27 tripped me up a little bit because I don't know. This is where I don't know whether the author of Hebrews is talking about, which time he leaves Egypt. It seems to singularly point towards him in 27, where it says, by faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. So in other words, I don't know if that's the first time he left Egypt. You remember? Why did he leave the first time? Yeah, he comes upon an Egyptian person beating an Israelite, and comes up on him and kills him. And then someone finds him out and talks to him, shortly after, and he has to run away. So to me, again, it boils back to like either way, whether it's that time or the time of the Exodus, it's saying something about Moses that he refused to fear the king's edict, just like his parents did. He says, I'm not going to, I've gone along with this long enough. I've seen these people be oppressed for 40 years, and these are my people, and I will not stand for it anymore. Think about this for a second. Think about this. If you were Moses, wouldn't it make more sense to be high up in Egypt, or even become the king of Egypt, and free your people that way? Wouldn't that make more sense? Like, let's work high up within this system, and then let's try to free. And that's not what he does. That's not what happens, because he's obedient to God, because he has this incident at the burning bush where he's like, I am who I am. God says this to Moses. You remember this? Or I will be who I will be. And he convinces Moses, he's like, okay, I'm with you. I've fled from Egypt. I've done all these things, and yet I will go back to Egypt, the place where I'm probably going to die if I go back to, right? But I trust you more. And I'm going to go back, and we're going to free the people together. The kind of faith it would take to stand up to Pharaoh and say that the plagues, to go back into Egypt and to say, hey, these plagues are coming upon you. I actually had a picture of all 10 plagues up there and what they kind of symbolized, but I can't remember it now, what they all symbolized. But each one increases with intensity, and also the threat and the abuse of the Israelites also increase, right? Both things actually seem to escalate. And you're like, if you're an Israelite, think about this for a moment. Like, where is God in this? It's happening all around us, and now things are becoming even harder for us. It seems backwards or hard to understand sometimes. Okay, so something also that we're not really understanding is that there's specific gods, okay, in Egypt, many of them. And actually each plague, particularly, okay, so the first plague is what?
Water turning blood.
Yeah, water turning, the Nile specifically turning into blood. Now there was a god that was protector over the Nile, or that was part of the Nile, whose name was Happy, not like our happy, okay? Like, it's spelled differently, don't worry. I don't think he was very happy. Anyway, the god of the Nile, and the Nile River itself was the life blood, or the life stream of him. And he was the god of fertility. Okay? And so when God strikes the Nile down and turns it into blood, he's actually saying, like, I'm God here. Okay? There's other gods, and the Egyptians worship them, and maybe even you thought, oh, maybe in your 400 years of being here, that these might have some sort of power. He's like, no, I'm God. I am proving to you through these plagues and through this time that I am actually far more powerful than not only the king, but the gods of Egypt themselves. In fact, they're not even gods. They're nothing. So can you see how maybe God is trying to build up the faith of the Israelites before this pretty crazy event that's coming up? Yes? No?
Yeah.
A little bit? So these 9 plagues, increasing intensity, their abuse is increasing in intensity. And in fact, the 9th plague, Pharaoh says, get out of here, Moses, and if you come back, I'm going to kill you. I don't want to see you ever again. If you come back, I will kill you. And yet, Moses is told to prepare, as we see in verse 29, he is told to prepare the Passover lamb and putting the blood on the doorposts of all the Israelites who believe in Yahweh. Which leads to the major event in the Old Testament, and it's referred to throughout the entire rest of the Bible as the thing pointing to the final Exodus, where Jesus Christ comes to take us home. The 10th plague finally came, and Pharaoh releases the Israelites, right? Sort of. Like for a minute, right? He lets them go, and then he realizes, this is kind of my livelihood. These people are our slaves, and they're making things for us. And so he chases them down. Now imagine if you were an Israelite for a moment. How difficult this must have been, despite all they had seen, but actually getting up and leaving their homes and everything that they'd known, getting up and leaving and heading out for the unknown, only to be met by an unnavigable passage of water with a bloodthirsty army at your back. Talk about being trapped between a rock and a hard place, right? There's no way out for you. And you're sitting there, and we followed this madman Moses out here to this place because he claims to know God.
Especially when there was another route.
Especially when there was another route. Yes, around the sea. They could have gone anywhere, but yet the God led them to this spot, right? In Patriarchs and Prophets, page 290, it says this. It says, the imagination pictures impending ruin, She's relating this to our life now, okay? And how the difficulties of our lives sometimes are similar to this. He says, the imagination pictures impending ruin before bondage or death behind. Yet the voice of God speaks clearly, go forward. We should obey this command. Even though your eyes cannot penetrate the darkness and we feel the cold waves about our feet. Unbelief whispers, let us wait until the obstructions are removed and we can see our way clearly. But faith courageously urges us in advance, hoping in all things and believing all things. Even though we cannot see a way through, there are things that are coming down our way. It almost feels like this, right? Like everything we know has been changed in the last year and a half. Things are kind of crazy. Still, we feel like they're starting to settle down, but our world is ready to pop, right? Tensions are still high. Is that going to happen or not? Well, it sure looks like it. We don't know. But here's the thing, is that it can feel like this sometimes, but God still urges us forward, even when we cannot see the future. Even when we can't see what's right in front of us or what's ahead, he says, go, get up and go and follow me with everything that you have, and I will lead you through. That's what these promises are about. I had some beautiful pictures here. And we've talked a little bit about Moses and how he left. And what did he leave for? He spent 40 years wandering with these whiners, camping in the desert. Memorial Weekend is the most camped weekend of our whole year, right? Crystal and I actually joined in with that. And we went to Olympic National Park. And we went backpacking for 2 nights in the rainforest. And I have these pictures here, and I wish I could show them. Anyway, they're just kind of amazing. And I was thinking, like, why do we go camping?
Nature.
To enjoy nature, sure. Yeah.
Peace and quiet.
Yep, that's a big one.
Fresh air, campfire.
Campfire.
Yeah, those are all enjoyable.
To escape my rat race.
Yes. Yeah, this is what it felt like. Thank you, Paul. Yes, to escape. Really, seriously. We went camping and I lost my phone for the first time in a couple of years. And it was, at first I was panicked, right? And I'm just like, oh. And then I was like, actually, seriously, actually this is amazing. And I just stopped worrying about it. I said, oh, it'll turn up. And it did, thankfully. So I found it. So that wasn't a big deal. But I remember that feeling of like this constant pressure that we live in our culture. It's oppressive, by the way. Because our culture itself, and I don't mean just people enforcing rules physically upon us, that may happen, right? We know that's going to happen at some point. And it's already, some things are already in, but we have lived and grown up in an oppressive culture. We worship other things. They worship other gods in this culture. Sometimes we speak of worshiping God as a nation or as a culture, but we really worship business and entertainment, quick responses, prestige, money, the new gadget, and unlimited indulgences. We fall in love and that becomes the pursuit of our life. And then we realize, as we've just read in Ecclesiastes, that these things are just pointless. They're not life. You realize that these things in themselves, they're alive, thinking that we need them. We turn a good thing into a bad thing because we've obsessed over it. And we've worshipped it as it was a god. Jesus is saying, like, look, these things, I know that we want them. I know that they're good things, but we take our freedom and we actually become slaves. We live in a country full of slaves. Full of them. Because we think we need to keep up with the Joneses. Or we think that we need to have a certain status or look a certain way. Or we need to have this mindless entertainment constantly going through our minds, and we realize that this is all just dead. If that were true, we wouldn't have millionaires overdosing. We wouldn't have people committing suicide that have all those things. Those things are not life. They become oppressive, and we realize that the lies that our culture believes about them is actually become oppressive. We may not get the best tasting things or have all the things that the rest of the world might have, but are we willing to sacrifice those things to follow Jesus into freedom? Now. I'm not talking about something that's coming, like right now. Because it's pointing us actually to this ultimate freedom that Jesus Christ is willing to give us, not just now, but also into eternity. He's like, look, it's just better. My life with you, it's just far better. And if you listen to me and you follow me and you give up those things that have consumed our hearts, you will have a better life. Even when we get whiny in the wilderness and we miss our old lives sometimes, we need to remember the Exodus. Remember when God has brought us out of this tyrannical time of oppression, of whatever it is that he's bringing us out of. And we have to look back and remember God who has brought us out of that. Do we have a closing song? Okay.
Okay, if we can turn to 26B, Power in the Blood.
Heavenly Father, there is power in your blood. Thank you for shedding it. Thank you that Moses, in his faithfulness, shines a light on what you have done for us, Lord. You have led us out of the wilderness, out of the darkness, and even out of Egypt as well, Lord, into the promised land. You have promised this, and we are seen to be stuck still somewhere in limbo. But Lord, we believe you, we trust you, we have faith that you will pull us through because you've already done that in the past. You've done it so many times, not just to us, but to countless others, Lord. And I just pray that we keep those moments of faith, those moments of you being faithful to us in mind so that we can be faithful to you in the end. Thank you so much for our little church here, and I just pray for a deeper conviction and a deeper trust with you. In Jesus' name,